What's up guys, this is Evan with Roambuilt. Today we're going to walk through an installation of our Sprinter side steps. So these are made from aluminum, so they're strong but they're nice and light. And it's also a pretty simple, straightforward installation, which we'll cover shortly. We have them in a 170 and a 144 version. This is the 170 version, and they're ladder compatible, meaning that the driver's side is about 16 inches shorter than the passenger side to allow clearance for the ladder. On the passenger side here, you can see we've got a nice drop down perforated step for the front door, as well as a full length step for the slider. The brackets offer really good triangulation because you will through bolt through the pinch weld and then into some rib nuts with this top plate. Driver's step here has the full length main tube and the step just under the driver's door. Let's look at what you get, what's in the box, and what tools you'll need. As I mentioned a minute ago, it's a very straightforward install, and that's because each step is fully welded, fully assembled, so that all you do is take the assembly, hold it up under the van where it goes with either some jack stands or a couple buddies, mark the hole locations, drill the holes, install rib nuts, and put the bolts in. It's as easy as that. You're going to get this hardware kit which has all the hardware and rib nuts I just mentioned. Then all you're going to need is a drill with some bits, which we'll cover the sizes in a minute, a couple wrenches, sockets, and a hex key, and then some way to install the rib nuts. And we have this really inexpensive but useful manual version right here. If you're not used to installing rib nuts, here's a really basic crash course. So a rib nut provides a way to install a threaded hole where you can't reach the backside. So we're going to use this test panel and pretend this is the body of the van. So we have our hole drilled out to the right size, and we have the included rib nut. Just put it into the hole, and you're basically going to use the tool to squish this, swedge it into place so that it grips. So I'm going to show you two different methods. This is available at Harbor Freight or Amazon pretty inexpensively. I think this was about a $50 or $60 tool, so it's nice to have if you do this every now and then. When you open up the handles, the mandrel extends, and when you pull the handles together, it will collapse this on itself. So we'll do this one first. So you start by opening the handles up, threading this on until it kind of stops. Then we'll put it in this hole. And I'll try to do this really smoothly so you can see it. Takes a pretty good squeeze. And you back it out. There you have an installed threaded hole. Now if you're fortunate enough to have some type of pneumatic gun like this is how I'm going to do some of the other holes. We just picked this up. It's really nice. It's automatic and it does a really nice job. So if you do this all the time, you'll probably want to get some sort of pneumatic setup. Squeeze the trigger and then back it out. So they both do the same thing. One's just a little less labor. So we're going to do this under the van a bunch of times. Before we go under the van, just want to note how far to put this forward, rearwards. If you have a ladder, you might install it first. That'll tell you exactly where you need to put this, but you don't have to. I'm gonna put this about, I don't know, half an inch or so behind the mud flap. Now, if you're not gonna put a ladder on, it doesn't matter quite as much. You can just put it wherever it's comfortable, but this is about where you're gonna want it so it doesn't interfere with the ladder. Lift it into place, push it up on the pinch weld, and then we're gonna go under the van and start marking holes. On the passenger side, placement isn't as critical since there's no ladder. I just like to put this X-shaped piece below the gap between the doors. So I'm going to show you the process to get the holes marked for a mount. There's 5 mounts per step on the 170 and there's fewer on the 144. So I'm going to show you the process on one mount start to finish, and it'll be the same for the rest of them. So I'm going to mark the location for the pinch weld holes from the outside here, just with a Sharpie or another pen. And you can see my step drop down just a little bit. In this case, it dropped down because the marker was too thick to fit in there. So when I actually drill the hole, I'm going to note how much the step needs to go up, and I'll shift those holes up by that amount. Now we're going to go on the inside and check those holes. Okay, I'm going to mark all 4 holes, although it's not necessary to use all 4. There's 4 holes in here because you might have some sort of constraint underneath the van that allows you to not get to all 4 holes. That's actually the case for this fan up at the front because there's a Webasto heater installed. So I'm going to have all 4 marked, and I'm just going to use whichever 2 appear to be the best location for a rib nut. Now I'm going to go ahead, mark all the rest of the holes, and then we'll come back and start drilling. We got all the holes marked, dropped the steps out of the way, and then I got ahead of myself and started drilling some holes off camera. Here we are, I've got my pilot holes drilled. I decided to come up just almost a 1/4 inch from where my holes were marked based on how I had to drop it down to mark the holes. And as you can see, I'm gonna pick the outer lower 2 holes on this one, because if I picked the upper 2 holes, it would be kind of right on this body, little bump out, this body line here, and that wouldn't work very well for a rib nut. On this back one, I chose the upper 2 because it's a nice, smooth, flat location for the rib nuts. In my opinion, picking the upper 2 is going to be better if you have the choice, just because that's going to offer a little bit more triangulation distance from the pivot point on the mount to where it attaches to the body. But if you can't, just get whichever 2 make the most sense for that mount. So I'm going to step up to the main size, which is going to be 17/32. That'll be the size that fits the actual rib nut. I started out with about an 1/8 inch, so I stepped up to about a 1/4 inch, which for your pinch weld holes is where you stop. 1/4 inch or a 1/16 or so above would be okay, but that's 1/4 inch hardware. Then I'm going to jump up to maybe I think this is a 3/8, and then I'll do a 1/2, and then I'll finish with my 17/32. So we'll do that for all the rest of the holes. When you drill the final size hole, you may have to clearance it out just a little bit with the drill bit, but be careful. You still want this to be a snug fit in there. If it's too loose, you run the risk of it kind of wiggling around a little bit and never really making a tight seat. So we're going to put one in with the manual tool, and then I'm going to use the pneumatic tool for the rest of them. Do your best to keep this straight in all planes as you compress it. I'm going to rotate it a little bit because I'm hitting the frame with my handles. Okay. It needs to compress a little bit more, so I'm basically getting another bite with it by extending that nose piece in there. A little more. There, that felt solid. There you go. After we got all the rib nuts in, then I just lifted the step back into place with the help of a buddy, and I'm just going to start at the back and work my way to the front. It really doesn't matter which order you do, but I do want to get all the bolts into the rib nut started first and just kind of snug down finger tight. Then I'll come through and put the bolts through the pinch weld. We're going to use a lock washer first up against the bolt head, then a flat washer. Same thing on the rest of them. Now we have all the bolts started on the inside into the rib nuts. Just a quick note, if maybe your drill bit walked or you had an issue getting the rib nut exactly where you wanted it, you might have to oversize one of your holes with the drill bit. I thought I was going to have that happen, but I was able to just push really hard up on the step to get the holes to line up. So just if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world if you have to oversize one of your mounting holes just a little bit. So the next step is going to be putting in our 1/4-20 black stainless bolts through the pinch weld. It's handy to have a long hex key like this to get that started. I've got a flat washer on the bolt. And then on the inside, we're going to do flat washer, then lock washer, then nut. And again, we'll get all these started before we tighten any of them down. Same thing on the rest of them. Once you have the rest of the 1/4-20 bolts in, now it's time to go back with a 1/2 inch socket or wrench and tighten down the bolts into the body, into the rib nuts, and then finally tighten down the 1/4-20 bolts with a 5/32 hex key and a 7/16 wrench or socket. And that's it, that wraps up the install. The last thing to do is go back through and make sure all your bolts are properly tightened down. And that wraps it up. If you have any questions, reach out to us at roambuilt.com.